Billionaire CEO interviews a black single dad by mistake, but what happened next shocked everyone. Tyrell Banks walked into the Montgomery Global building praying for a night shift janitorial position just to keep his sick daughter alive. He was wearing a suit older than his troubles, held together by nothing but desperation and a cheap belt. But 30 floors up, Claire Montgomery wasn't looking for a cleaner. She was waiting for a ruthless vice president to save her crumbling logistics empire. When these two opposites collided in a mix-up that should have ended in immediate humiliation, it instead sparked a chain of events that exposed the raw, painful gap between the rich and the forgotten. Most people think they know the difference between success and failure, but by the end of this story, you will realize that sometimes the person cleaning the floor is the only one who knows how to build the foundation. Stick around because the decision made in that room didn't just change a career, it saved a life. The rain in Chicago that afternoon wasn't just weather, it felt like a judgment. It was a relentless, freezing gray sheet of water that seemed to wash the color right out of the streets. For Tyrell Banks, standing just outside the revolving glass doors of the Montgomery Global building, the weather matched his internal world perfectly. He stood under the overhang, shaking off a cheap black umbrella that had finally given up the ghost. Two of the metal spokes had snapped in the wind, leaving the fabric flapping uselessly against the handle. Tyrell stared at it for a moment, his heart sinking. That umbrella was just one more thing he couldn't afford to replace. He turned toward the glass doors, catching his reflection in the dark tint. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his hands. The suit he was wearing was clean, but it was old. It was the suit he had bought for his wedding 10 years ago. The fabric at the elbows was worn dangerously thin, shining slightly under the streetlights. The trousers were a size too loose now, cinched tight with a leather belt that was cracked near the buckle. He had lost weight. Stress had a way of carving a man down to the bone. "Do this for Maya," he whispered to himself. The sound of his daughter's name was the only fuel he had left. Just get the job. Just get in the door. Tyrell checked his watch. The glass face was scratched, but it still kept time. 1:50 p.m. He was 10 minutes early for his interview. The email from HR had been brief. Report to the Montgomery Global main lobby, 2 p.m. He smoothed down his tie, wiped a raindrop from his forehead, and pushed through the revolving doors. The silence of the lobby was instant and intimidating. The roar of the city rain vanished, replaced by the soft hum of expensive air conditioning and the rhythmic clicking of heels on polished marble. The air smelled of white tea and money. Tyrell felt his shoes squeak on the floor, a loud rubbery sound that echoed in the vast space. He winced, trying to walk lighter. He approached the front desk, but before he could even open his mouth to speak, a young woman in a sharp gray blazer intercepted him. She was frantic. She was holding a tablet in one hand and a phone in the other, her eyes darting between Tyrell and the elevator bank. "Mr. Kensington?" she asked, though it sounded more like a statement than a question. Tyrell blinked. No, You're early," she cut him off, her relief palpable. "Thank heavens. Miss Montgomery is on a warpath today. If you were even a minute late, she would have shredded your resume before you sat down." She grabbed his arm, gently but firmly, and steered him toward the private elevators. "Wait, miss," Tyrell tried to protest, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I think there's a misunderstanding. I'm Tyrell. I'm here for the 2 p.m. slot, yes, I know," she said, swiping a key card over the elevator panel. The doors slid open with a whisper. "Look, I don't care what name you go by, just get in there. She's expecting the shark from the competition, and honestly, you look the part. Just go." She practically shoved him inside and hit the button for the 30th floor. Good luck, the doors closing before Tyrell could get another word out. Don't let her smell fear. Tyrell stood alone in the elevator as it shot upward, his stomach dropping to his feet. He stared at the numbers climbing. 10, 20, 30. He was confused. The email for the custodial lead position had said to meet the hiring manager. He assumed the facilities manager had an office on the upper floors, or maybe the janitorial staff had a meeting room up here. He didn't know how these skyscrapers worked. He had spent the last 3 years driving strangers around in a beat-up sedan and the 8 years before that on a warehouse floor. He clutched his manila folder tighter. The edges were damp from the rain. Inside was a single sheet of paper that outlined a life that felt like it belonged to a stranger. Ding! The doors opened. If the lobby was impressive, the 30th floor was another world entirely. It was a sprawling expanse of white leather, chrome, and floor-to-ceiling glass. The view of the rainy city was breathtaking, turning the miserable weather into moving art. And there, standing by the window with her back to him, was a woman who looked like she owned the storm itself. Claire Montgomery. Tyrell recognized her from the magazines he used to read in waiting rooms. 32 years old, one of the youngest female billionaires in the country. She was dressed in a tailored white suit that looked like it cost more than Tyrell's car. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect bun. "Ms. Montgomery?" The intercom on her desk buzzed. "The 2 o'clock is here." "Send him in," Claire said, not turning away from the window. Her voice was sharp, clear, and cold. Tyrell stepped forward. The carpet was so thick it silenced his squeaking shoes. He felt like an intruder. He felt like a speck of dust in a sterile operating room. The heavy oak doors to her personal office were open. Tyrell walked in and stopped. He cleared his throat. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was deep and steady, a stark contrast to the trembling in his hands. "I'm Tyrell. Thank you for seeing me." Claire turned around. Her eyes were blue, piercing, and intelligent. She scanned him in less than a second. She saw the worn fabric of his suit. She saw the dark circles under his eyes that no amount of coffee could hide. She saw the rough, calloused hands clutching the damp folder. She frowned slightly. This wasn't what she expected. Robert Kensington, the candidate she was waiting for, was rumored to be a corporate shark, a man who wore Italian silk and smiled like a predator. Tyrell looked tired. He looked like a man who carried the weight of the world in his pockets. Eccentric, Claire thought. Some of these supply chain geniuses dress down to prove a point. They want to show they aren't afraid of the grit. "Have a seat," Claire said, gesturing to the black leather chair opposite her massive glass desk. Tyrell sat, placing the folder on his lap. He sat on the edge of the chair, his posture rigid. He was terrified. Why was the CEO interviewing him for a cleaning job? Maybe the company was smaller than he thought? Maybe she was a micromanager who hired every single employee personally. He decided not to question it. He couldn't afford to question it. The rent was 3 weeks late. Maya's medication was running low. He needed this paycheck. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Claire said, walking around her desk and leaning against the edge of it, crossing her arms. "I've seen the numbers. I know what you're capable of. But my question is, can you handle the mess we have here? Our efficiency is down 12%. The place is disorganized, things are getting lost in the cracks, and nobody seems to care." Tyrell blinked. He sat up straighter. This made sense. She was talking about the mess, the dirt, the lack of cleanliness. "Ma'am, I know a thing or two about cleaning up messes," Tyrell said, his confidence returning slightly. This was ground he understood. "I'm thorough. I don't leave until the job is done. If efficiency is the problem, it's usually because people aren't paying attention to the small details. Dust in the vents, clutter in the walkways, it all slows things down. You ignore the small corners, and eventually the whole building feels heavy." Claire raised an eyebrow. It was an odd metaphor, dust in the vents, but she liked the philosophy. It was gritty. It was real. Most executives buzzed with words like synergy and paradigm shifts. This man was talking about the foundation. "Agreed. And what about your schedule? This job requires long hours, nights, weekends. It eats your life. I need someone who is going to be here when everyone else has gone home." Tyrell swallowed hard. The lump in his throat felt like a stone. Nights. That was exactly what he needed. "I'm ready for nights, ma'am," Tyrell said softly. "In fact, nights are better for me. It allows me to handle my responsibilities during the day." Claire's eyes narrowed. The softness vanished. "Responsibilities." She walked back behind her desk and sat down, interlacing her fingers. "I need total commitment. We're in a crisis. What responsibilities are we talking about? Another consultancy? A side business?" Tyrell looked down at his hands. His knuckles were scarred from years of manual labor. He hesitated. He had been rejected from 3 jobs this month because he mentioned his daughter. Employers didn't want a single dad with a sick kid. They wanted a machine that didn't need time off. But looking at Claire, he realized he couldn't lie. He didn't have the energy to keep up a lie. "My daughter, Maya," Tyrell said. Claire sighed, tapping her expensive pen on the glass desk. The sound was like a ticking clock. "We all have families, Tyrell, but this role demands sacrifice. Why should I hire you over the other sharks circling this position? Why should I trust you with the keys to my operation?" Tyrell frowned. Sharks? For a janitorial job? He looked at her, confused, but the desperation rose up in his chest again, choking him. "Because I can't afford to fail," Tyrell said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room. "I'm not doing this for a bonus, ma'am. I'm not doing this for stock options or a corner office. I'm doing this because I have to survive." Claire paused. She stopped tapping the pen. The desperation in his voice was raw. It wasn't the greedy desperation she was used to in the corporate world. It was something heavier. It was the sound of a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "Let me see your resume," she said, holding out her hand. Tyrell hesitated. He wiped his palm on his trousers and handed over the damp manila folder. Claire took it. She expected to see degrees from Wharton or Harvard. She expected to see a list of mergers, acquisitions, and high-level logistics management. She flipped the folder open. There was a single sheet of cheap printer paper inside. Tyrell Banks. Education. GED. HVAC certification. Previous experience. Warehouse logistics manager 2010 to 2018. Uber driver 2019 to 2021. Objective. Custodial staff. Night shift maintenance. Claire froze. She read it again. She flipped the paper over, looking for the rest of it. There was nothing. She looked up at Tyrell, her blue eyes wide with genuine confusion. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. "What is this?" she asked. Tyrell shifted in his seat. He sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The air had gone from cold to freezing. "My resume. For the cleaning position? HR told me to come to the main lobby. Am I in the wrong place?" Claire stared at him. The pieces clicked into place instantly. Her new assistant, Holly, had mixed up the candidates. Robert Kensington was probably sitting in the lobby downstairs, fuming, while Tyrell Banks, a man applying to scrub the toilets, was sitting in the CEO's penthouse. A typical CEO would have ended it right there. They would have laughed, apologized for the error, rang security, and had him escorted to the service elevator. But Claire didn't ring security. Her eyes drifted back to the resume. She looked at the gap. The timeline didn't make sense. 2010 to 2018, warehouse logistics manager. That was a solid mid-level management role. It required organization, leadership, and brain power. 2019 to 2021, Uber driver. 2021 to present, nothing. "You were a logistics manager for 8 years, Claire observed, her voice softer now, curiosity replacing her irritation. "That's a real career, Tyrell. Why are you applying for a janitorial position? Why are you sitting here asking to clean floors?" Tyrell looked at the door. He felt the heat of humiliation rising up his neck. He should leave. He had wasted this woman's time. He grabbed his umbrella. "I should go, ma'am. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Sit down, Tyrell." It wasn't a request. It was a command, though her tone wasn't angry. Tyrell paused, hovering halfway out of his chair. "Please," Claire said, leaning forward, "tell me, why the drop? What happened in 2018, and what happened in 2021? Tyrell looked at her. He saw genuine curiosity in her face. For the first time all day, someone was looking at him, not at his old suit, not at his resume, but at him. He let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 years. He sat back down. "My wife, Alicia." "What happened?" "It wasn't a car crash or anything you see on the news," Tyrell said, his voice trembling slightly. He stared at the rain hitting the window behind Claire. remembering a sunny Tuesday morning that changed everything. We were happy. We had a house in the suburbs, 2 cars, savings. We were planning a vacation. He swallowed. One morning, she didn't wake up. Cerebral hemorrhage. The doctors said it was instant, no warning signs. She was just gone. Claire's expression softened. The mask of the billionaire CEO cracked, revealing the woman underneath. I am so sorry. That was the beginning. After the funeral, I tried to keep working. I tried to be the manager I used to be. But then, Maya, she got sick. Your daughter? Tyrell nodded. It started with her knees, then her hands. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night because her joints were on fire. It took 6 months to get a diagnosis. It's a rare autoimmune condition. Her body attacks her own joints. He looked at his hands, clenching them into fists. She needs infusions every 2 weeks just to walk. Without them, she's in a wheelchair. The insurance I had at the logistics job had a lifetime cap. We hit it in 6 months. Tyrell looked up, his eyes wet. I had to take days off to drive her to specialists, then weeks off when she was hospitalized. My company was patient for a while, but eventually profit matters more than people. They let me go. I lost the health insurance. I sold the house to pay the hospital bills, sold the cars. We moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the South Side. Claire listened, stunned. She dealt with millions of dollars every single day. She moved ships across oceans and fleets of trucks across continents. But she had never calculated the cost of a human life falling apart. Why the cleaning job? She asked softly. Because the shifts are 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., Tyrell explained. I can be home to get Maya dressed, take her to her appointments and homeschool her because she's too immune compromised for public school. Then, when she sleeps, I can work. I haven't slept more than 3 hours a night in 2 years, ma'am. But I have to buy her medication. 1 vial is $3,000. He leaned forward, his voice fierce with a father's love. I'm not a beggar. I have skills. I know how to run a warehouse floor. I know supply chains better than I know the back of my hand. But no one hires a logistics manager who needs to leave at random times for emergency room visits. So I clean. I'll scrub every floor in this building with a toothbrush if it keeps my daughter alive. If you've ever had to fight just to keep your family afloat, if you know what it's like to sacrifice your pride for the people you love, hit that like button right now. You are the real warriors, and this story is for you. Claire sat back in her chair. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't cold anymore. It was filled with a profound sense of respect. She looked around her opulent office. She thought about her own life, the empty penthouse she went home to, the expensive dinner she ate alone, the cold accumulation of wealth that kept her warm but never happy. She looked at Tyrell, a man who had lost everything but his dignity, fighting a war for a little girl she had never met. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed again, shattering the moment. Ms. Montgomery, Mr. Kensington is asking why he's been waiting for 20 minutes. He's yelling at the reception staff. He says his time is worth $500 a minute. Claire stared at Tyrell for a long moment. She looked at his cheap, broken watch. She looked at his damp folder. Then she pressed the button on the intercom. Tell Mr. Kensington, Claire started, her eyes locked on Tyrell. Tell Mr. Kensington the position has been filled. He can go home. Tyrell's eyes widened. He sat frozen in the chair, his heart skipping a beat. Ma'am, please, I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just want the cleaning job. You don't have to— Wait, Claire interrupted herself, her finger hovering over the intercom button. She paused. A thought sparked behind her eyes, sharp and sudden. She looked at Tyrell, then at the blinking light of the intercom where the arrogant Mr. Kensington was waiting. She pressed the button. Actually, Holly, send him in. Tyrell panicked. He reached for his folder, preparing to stand up. I should go. I shouldn't be here for this. Stay, Claire said. Her voice was unyielding. Sit down, Tyrell. I want you to see something. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Robert Kensington strode in. He was exactly as Tyrell imagined. He wore a navy suit that fit like a second skin, a silk tie, and a watch that cost more than Tyrell's parents' house. He didn't walk, he glided. He carried an air of entitlement that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Robert stopped in the middle of the room, flashing a bright, predatory smile at Claire. He didn't even look at Tyrell. To him, Tyrell was just furniture, a piece of the background. "Claire," Robert said, his voice smooth like oiled leather. "Finally, my time is premium, you know, but for Montgomery Global, I can make an exception. I assume we're skipping the formalities? You know my reputation." "I do," Claire said, leaning back in her chair. She gestured to Tyrell. "Robert, this is Tyrell Banks. He's also interviewing today." Robert finally turned his head. His eyes flicked over Tyrell's scuffed shoes, his frayed collar, and the broken umbrella resting against the desk. A smirk curled the corner of his lip. "I see," Robert said, letting out a short, dismissive laugh. "Didn't realize we were doing charity work today, Claire. Or is he here to fix the copier?" Tyrell tightened his grip on his knees. He was used to this look. He had seen it on the faces of landlords, loan officers, and doctors who told him his insurance was declined. He kept his face blank, his dignity held tight like a shield. "He's here to solve problems," Claire said coolly. "Speaking of which, we have one right now." Just then, Holly, the assistant, rushed back into the room. She looked pale. "Miss Montgomery, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but the Midwest hub just called. The main distribution center in Ohio is gridlocked. The drivers are refusing to cross the picket line at the rail yard, and we have 40 tons of medical-grade perishable supplies sitting in trucks that are running out of fuel. If they don't move in 3 hours, the cargo spoils. That's a $6 million loss." The room went silent. This was a catastrophe. Claire looked at Robert. "Well, Mr. Kensington, you're the shark. You want the VP role? Solve it, right now. 40 tons of spoiling cargo. What's the move?" Robert straightened his tie. He didn't look worried, he looked annoyed. "Simple. Threaten the drivers. Tell them if they don't cross the line, their contracts are voided. If they still refuse, call the National Guard or hire scabs. Force the route. You can't let labor dictate logistics." Claire stared at him. "Those drivers have been with us for 10 years. You want me to fire them to save one shipment? It's a $6 million shipment, Claire. Personnel are replaceable. Profit isn't." Claire didn't say anything. She turned her gaze to Tyrell. He was sitting on the edge of his seat, his brow furrowed, doing mental math. "Tyrell," Claire asked quietly, "what would you do?" Tyrell looked up. He wasn't looking at Claire, he was looking at the map of the Midwest in his head. He knew those roads. He had driven them. "You can't force the rail yard," Tyrell said, his voice gaining strength. "If you threaten the drivers, they'll walk. Then you have trucks with no keys, and you can't hire scabs in 3 hours." "So what? We lose the cargo?" Robert scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Brilliant." "No," Tyrell said sharply. He stood up and walked to the wall map behind Claire's desk. He pointed to a small web of secondary highways. "The main hub is blocked, right? But the B routes through the agricultural zones are open. The farmers use smaller utility roads to move grain this time of year. They aren't picket-lined." He turned to Claire. "Don't force the semi-trucks through. They're too big for the B routes. Call the hub manager. Tell him to break the pallets down. Offload the 40 tons into the sprinter vans and the localized courier fleet. They can take the back roads. It'll take twice as many drivers, but the vans can bypass the rail yard entirely. You'll lose about 4 hours on delivery time, but you save the cargo and you don't have to fire a single person." Silence. Total silence. Claire stared at the map. She did the calculation in her head. It was brilliant. It was messy, it was manual, and it required extra labor, but it worked. It was a solution born from someone who knew what it was like to be in the driver's seat, not just looking at a spreadsheet. "Holly," Claire barked, "get the Ohio manager on the phone. Tell him to mobilize the sprinter fleet. Use the agricultural B routes." "Yes, ma'am." Holly ran out. Claire turned back to the two men. She looked at Robert Kensington, who was frowning, looking slightly confused about what a sprinter fleet even was. Then she looked at Tyrell, who was still standing by the map, looking tired but capable. "Mr. Kensington," Claire said, her voice dropping to absolute zero, "we're done here." "Excuse me?" Robert blinked. "I haven't even shown you my quarterly projections." You would have fired my staff and caused a strike that would last months. You know the theory of business, Robert, but you don't know the reality. Please, leave my office." Robert turned red. He opened his mouth to argue, saw the look on Claire's face, and snapped it shut. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, muttering something about amateurs as he slammed a heavy door behind him. The room was quiet again, just the sound of the rain against the glass. Tyrell stood awkwardly by the map. He felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over him. The adrenaline was fading. He remembered who he was, a man with a broken umbrella and an empty bank account. "That was impressive," Claire said softly. "I just know the roads, ma'am," Tyrell said, moving back to his chair. "I drove those routes for Uber when the warehouse closed. You learn the shortcuts when you're trying to make an extra $5. Claire walked around her desk. She leaned against it, looking down at him. Her face was unreadable. "You're not getting the cleaning job, Tyrell." The words hit him like a physical blow. Tyrell's shoulders slumped. The light in his eyes died instantly. Of course. He had stepped out of line. He had spoken up in a meeting he wasn't supposed to be in. He had humiliated a VP candidate.
"I understand," Tyrell whispered. His voice broke. I overstepped. I'm sorry." He stood up. He felt heavy, like gravity had doubled in the room. He reached for his damp folder and his broken umbrella. "Thank you for listening to me, Ms. Montgomery," he said, his dignity barely holding together. "I'll show myself out." He turned and walked toward the door. Every step was agonizing. He thought about Maya waiting for him at home. She would ask, "Did you get the job, Daddy?" He would have to look into her big, trusting eyes and tell her no. He would have to tell her he failed. Again. He reached the door. He put his hand on the brass handle. He thought about the pawn shop down the street. Maybe if he sold his wedding ring, he could pay for one more week of medication. But then what? What about next week? He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. "Tyrell!" Claire's voice rang out from the office. He stopped. He turned around slowly. Claire was standing in the doorway. She wasn't looking at him like a CEO anymore. She was looking at him like a human being. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Home," Tyrell said, "to tell my daughter I tried." "Come back in here," Claire said. She waved him in. "Sit down." Tyrell walked back in, confused. He sat in the chair again, clutching his umbrella like a lifeline. "I said you're not getting the cleaning job," Claire said, sitting on the edge of her desk right in front of him. "And I meant it. That would be a waste of your talent." She picked up his resume, the one with the gap, the one that screamed failure to the rest of the world. "I'm creating a new position, head of internal logistics. I need someone who knows the ground level, someone who knows how to solve problems without destroying people, someone with integrity." Tyrell froze. He stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "Ma'am?" "The salary is $120,000 a year," Claire said casually, as if she were discussing the weather, "plus a performance bonus." Tyrell couldn't breathe. The room spun. $120,000. That was a house. That was food. That was a future. "But the hours," Tyrell stammered, panic mixing with hope. "I told you, my daughter, I can't do 9 to 5. I have to drive her to therapy. I have to." "Then don't work 9 to 5, Claire cut him off firmly. "I don't care where you are. Work from the hospital waiting room. Work from your kitchen table at midnight. As long as the trucks move and the problems get solved, you make your own schedule." Tears began to well up in Tyrell's eyes. Hot, stinging tears that he couldn't stop. He tried to blink them away, but he was too tired. He was so tired of fighting. "And Tyrell," Claire added, her voice softening. "Yes?" "Montgomery Global has a top-tier executive insurance policy. It covers everything. Pre-existing conditions, dependents, long-term care, no lifetime caps, no deductibles." She slid a contract across the desk. "It starts the moment you sign this paper. You can take Maya to the specialist tomorrow. It won't cost you a dime." Tyrell put a hand over his mouth. A sob escaped his chest, a raw, guttural sound of relief that had been buried for 3 years. The weight of the world, the crushing pressure that had been sitting on his chest every single morning, suddenly vanished.
He looked at the contract. The letters blurred through his tears. "Why?" he managed to choke out. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Claire said. Her own eyes were shining. She wasn't the Ice Queen anymore. She was a woman who had finally found a way to use her power for something real. "I made a mistake with the schedule today, Tyrell, but hiring you won't be a mistake. You fought for your family when the world told you to give up. That's the kind of person I want beside me." She handed him a pen. Tyrell took it. His hand shook as he signed his name, Tyrell Banks. He stood up. He didn't know the protocol. He didn't know if he should bow or salute. Instinct took over. He reached out and took her hand in both of his. "You saved her life," he whispered, looking her straight in the eye. "You just saved my little girl's life." Claire squeezed his hand back, her grip warm and solid. "Go home, Tyrell. Go be with Maya. I'll see you on Monday." Tyrell walked out of the office. He forgot his broken umbrella leaning against her desk. He walked into the elevator, and as the doors closed, he finally let the tears fall freely. But for the first time in years, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of victory. He walked out of the building. The rain was still pouring, soaking him to the bone, but Tyrell didn't feel the cold. He looked up at the gray sky and smiled. He walked toward the bus stop, not as a janitor, not as a failure, but as a father who had won. If this story is touching your heart, please take a second to subscribe. It helps us share more stories like this with the world. 6 months later, the rain had cleared, replaced by the bright golden sun of a Chicago spring. The 30th floor of Montgomery Global looked different. It wasn't so cold anymore. There were plants in the lobby. The staff smiled more. Efficiency was up 20%, but the turnover rate had dropped to 0. The door to the head of logistics office was open. Inside, Tyrell was on the phone directing a fleet of trucks around a storm in the south. He looked healthy. The dark circles were gone. His suit was new, tailored and sharp. But the best part of the office wasn't the view or the furniture. It was the corner of the room. A small desk had been set up there, covered in coloring books and crayons. Maya sat there. She was 7 now. She wore pink sneakers and leg braces, but she was smiling. Her skin was clear. She wasn't in pain. She was humming a song as she colored a picture of a superhero. The door opened, and Claire Montgomery walked in. She didn't march in like a general anymore. She walked in with a coffee in her hand and a smile on her face. "Hey, boss," Tyrell said, hanging the phone. "Morning, Tyrell," Claire said. She walked past him and went straight to the little desk in the corner. She hiked up her expensive designer skirt and sat down on the floor next to the little girl. "Hi, Miss Claire," Maya chirped, holding up a purple crayon. "Hi, sweetie," Claire said, taking the crayon. "Are we doing the cape purple today?" "Yes, purple is for royalty," Maya declared.
Tyrell watched them. The billionaire CEO and his daughter sitting on the floor, coloring outside the lines. He touched the wedding ring on his finger, thinking of Alicia. He knew she was watching. He knew she was proud. It was a mistake that shocked everyone, a mix-up that should have never happened. But as Tyrell watched Claire laugh at something Maya said, he knew the truth. It wasn't a mistake. It was a miracle. And sometimes when you think you've hit rock bottom, you're actually just standing on the foundation of a brand new life. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope today. And remember, never judge a book by its cover. You never know whose story is about to change the world.